Hi everyone, I'm Shireen Lobdell and I'm the teacher at New Mexico Highlands University in the ceramics program. And this video is going to be about wedging. One of the things in our studio about the clay is that we make it ourselves. And so it looks like this when you pull it out of the storage bin. It's not all nicely wedged and homogeneous like it is when you buy it at the clay store. So you have to wedge it. I'm going to say, with hand building, I don't always make people wedge. If the clay is at a nice consistency and workable, I usually don't make people wedge because they're going to be rolling out slabs and they're going to be coiling and they're going to be compressing the clay in that manner. You're going to notice this clay has two colors. It's just oxidized. It's the clay, once we wedge it up, it's all going to become one color because it's just a discoloration from the air. So that's not something that's going to show up later in your clay. Now, what I like to have people do when they first start out, and this is going to be about wedging clay for the wheel. When they first start out on the wheel, I tell them to weigh out their clay balls. And so you pull out your clay from the clay bin and you put it on the scale. And what I'm going to be working with today are 2-pound pieces of clay. And you can see on this scale, if you're using this one, you need to look at the black numbers on the exterior ring. The red numbers in here are going to be incorrect. That's a different measurement. We want pounds, and those are on the outside ring. So right here we have 2 pounds of clay. And so what I like to have people do is to weigh out at least 3 or 4 balls of 2 pounds of clay to start out with throwing. And I like the 2-pound amount because I find that it's kind of the easiest to handle. If you go smaller, you feel like you're doing it with your fingertips. If you go larger, it's more physical. So this is a good place to start. Get 2 pounds of clay and measure them out. So I have 3 of those right here. This one I've already kind of wedged a bit. And then I'm also going to show you something about larger pieces of clay in a minute. So in order to wedge your clay properly, I like to use the ram's head method. There's 2 basic methods, the spiral and the ram's head. And the spiral is only really useful for large pieces of clay. I'm going to talk about that after I show you the ram's head. So when you're wedging, first of all, you want to make sure your clay is soft. If it's not squeezable like this and soft, then you need to add water to it. And it's easy enough. You just take a spray bottle, spray some water in there, and fold it in. If it's the right consistency, which this clay is, just you could start wedging it up. If you want the clay to have more strength on the wheel and you're afraid that it wasn't mixed up with enough sand, you can wedge sand into it. I do that all the time, especially if I'm going to do a larger piece. I want to have some good working strength. So there can be a lot of manipulating of the clay before it gets to the wheel in the wedging process. Also, if your clay's too sticky, you can pound it out flat on the table so that there's a big surface area, and that's going to pull some water out. See the moisture that came out of the clay already from doing that. Also, wedging it is going to take some of the moisture out as well. So let's go ahead and start wedging. And your piece of clay, there's a couple reasons for wedging. I just found something in the clay that I don't want in there. Sometimes we get little weird inclusions. If you feel something in there, pull it out before you start. There's a couple reasons for wedging. One is to get the clay homogeneous, which means that the whole piece is the same. And when you get to the wheel, when you're pulling it up into a pot, it matters a lot whether the clay is all the same. If you have clay that's stiffer or wetter or drier, has more sand in it, less sand, in one part of it, it's going to pull differently. It's going to pull less or more, and your piece is going to get lopsided. So what you want is a completely uniform piece of clay. And it's also, like I said, a really good time to make sure that your texture is really good, your consistency is really good. So when we wedge, if you've ever kneaded bread, this is similar, and it'll help you to sort of catch on to how this works. But when you wedge, what you want to do is you want to rock the clay. And we're going to sort of hold it from the side like this, and we're going to push, and I'm going to be using the soft part of my hand, pushing it and rocking it back and pushing it down. Now, you don't want to push it so far like this that you have to fold it, because one of the things you're trying to do is to get the air bubbles out too. If you have air bubbles trapped in your clay, it's going to it's going to be a problem because the air bubble will make you pull the pot differently as you pull, and you're going to have to pop the air bubbles as you go. So that's another thing you're trying to do. Not only make it homogeneous, not only make it a nice workable texture, but also you want to get the air bubbles out. So there's lots of reasons for wedging. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rock it and pull it back in this slow motion, kind of holding it from the sides, push down with the soft part of my hand and come back up, pushing it into itself. And so I'm going to go a little faster now. And you get into this sort of rhythm. You don't want to fold the clay. You want to push it into itself and sort of pop the bubbles out. And the reason why this is called the ram's head method is because it sort of looks like horns and a face of a ram. Some people say it looks like a grumpy old man too, but I call it the ram's head method. Most people do. And you're going to work on it this way for a little while, and then you're going to roll it up and turn it this way and work on it this way so that you keep making it round. Keep putting it back into a round form. Okay, so you're going to wedge for at least a minute on each piece of clay. Roll it up, turn it, wedge it. Now another thing to think about once you have your clay nicely wedged, and here's a piece that I wedged earlier, is that you want to make it so that it has convex surfaces, which meaning it doesn't have anything like that going on. If you have that and you smack it down on the wheel, you're going to have a big air pocket in the bottom. So you make sure your piece is nice and rounded when you're all done. And then that's ready to use on the wheel after you've done this for a few minutes. This one's almost ready. But again, if it's not really pliable and soft and it doesn't easily roll for you, then you need to add some water to it. If it's too sticky, it's sticking to the table, you can't pull it up, you need to get some of the water out of it. And one of the ways to do that is to use a plaster bat. We have lots of plaster bats in the studio available, and you just pound the clay out on the plaster. Plaster draws water out really fast. You can also wedge on plaster if that helps, if your clay is super sticky. Okay, so that's the ram's head method, and like I said, I want you to start with a smaller amount like this. Get it nice and round before you put it away to use for the wheel. And now I want to show you something else. When we're doing a larger piece of clay, this is a 15-pound piece of clay. Some people feel that this is too much, too heavy, too hard to do in one piece with the ram's head method. Now, if you're fairly strong, you work out, you have big shoulders, you could probably do it. But some people feel like they need a break in terms of this wedging process. So you can do what we call the snail's method, and you sort of lean to the side, and you sort of wedge one side of it. And some people think that this looks prettier in the end, but you're kind of folding it into one side instead of sort of straight on. It's really takes a little bit of practice to sort of get that going. I don't really like this method. I don't feel like it's as thorough. So what I like to do, if I want to break from wedging a big piece of clay, if I don't want to just do this big ram's head, which is what I quite often will do, if I don't want to do that, I could break it into more than one piece, wedge the pieces separately, get them nice and thoroughly wedged, and then slap them back together and do just sort of a quick final wedge, and that'll get me the nice wedging that I need. That's what I prefer to do. But the snail wedge, it can get you to where you're not having to use as much of your strength. If you have a bad shoulder, bad back, something like that, it'll take a lot of the pressure off. Okay, so those are a couple of things that you can do. But it's very important to wedge to make sure your clay is all one color by the time you're done. And if you're not going to use them right away, put them inside a plastic bag. You can even spray them a little bit because you'll get a dry skin of clay on the outside otherwise. So if you're going to wedge a whole bunch of balls of clay, just have a bag, start putting them in that bag, spray them a little bit, keep them damp. Don't let that surface dry out on you before you get to throw it.